Hey everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here from GeekCast Radio doing my very first comic book haul video. It's what all the cool kids are doing, so I thought I would do it as well. I'm going to go through some of the recent pickups I got from my local comic book store and give you some thoughts and opinions on them. I'm not going to go in great detail and won't spoil anything. For a number of these books, I'm actually going to do specific videos on, dive in deeper, and give you my thoughts and opinions, as most of them I haven't had the chance of reading yet. But before I get to that, I did want to talk about one book that I actually fully reviewed, which was Amazing Spider-Man 800, and do a little bit of a correction or clarification regarding something I talked about. And as many people pointed out, this book is $10, and I think I made the unfair comparison to that in a first volume of an Image book, which is not true apples to apples comparison. They're very different in the sense of what you're paying for and the price, and ultimately I think price shouldn't really come into play when you're talking about or reviewing a book, because a book is not just any piece of art is not just made to be experienced right now. It's made to be experienced right now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and I think reviews should reflect that. So a review shouldn't really take into account price, because if price is an issue for you, which many people it is, I understand, there are plenty of ways to experience comics nowadays in ways that are more economical. You have Marvel Unlimited, you have local libraries where you can get books for free and not have to pay anything as long as you return them on time. So in the future, I'll probably avoid that. I know it becomes a hot topic for a lot of people, and I get that, but in my opinion, there are other ways in order to view your things. And ultimately, if you walk away happy with what you bought, that's what matters. And I enjoyed Spider-Man 800, and I don't feel bad paying for what I did. So that's ultimately the most important thing. Now on to this week's books, and it's a huge week in the world, in the week of comics. June seems to be the beginning of a lot of new things. Summer's here, school's ending, and maybe Marvel's like in DC are like, okay, let's let all of our big guns out. And before I get to that, I want to talk about Valiant with their summer event just recently started. These books actually came out previously, but my shop had to specially order them. They weren't carrying them for some reason, which is not good, because Valiant has some great stuff. And this is their big summer event, Harbinger Wars 2. This is a prelude in the first issue. And I really enjoyed both of these, although I enjoyed the prelude a lot more, written by Matt Kent, who is probably Valiant's best writer right now. He's working on X-Men Man of War. I like the direction it's going. I had some issues with the characterization in the first main issue. I thought the way some of the heroes were actually, or the protagonists were depicted, they lacked sympathy. The sense with a lot of the actions they were taking were so severe, where you ultimately thought they were going too far with things, where they're putting a lot of innocent people at risk for a cause that wasn't justified to that extent. But again, we'll see how it plays out. I trust Matt Kent as a writer. I'm sure it'll all kind of come together. It's not a great jumping on point if you've never read a Valiant book. You could probably catch up and understand most of it, but I would highly advise reading the Secret Weapons miniseries that came out last year. That's a great starting point. Doesn't really tie much into anything. You can come into that fresh, and much of this is being built off of that. As I mentioned, it's a big week for Marvel. A lot of their fresh start titles are coming out, and the one I'm most excited about actually is the Immortal Hulk. And I'm not a huge Hulk fan. I don't dislike the character, but I've never really picked up his main title for a long. One of my favorite renditions of the Hulk book was when it was the Incredible Hercules, and I did it right when it was like right after Planet Hulk, in between World Hulk. But this has me really intrigued. It's written by Al Ewing, who I'm a fan of, and it's more of a horror take, that more of the monster of Hulk. And we got a little glimpse of it in the Avengers No Surrender weekly series, and I really like that direction of it. So I'm really curious to see where they go with it and kind of redefine the character. I will be doing a full review of this where I talk about it, the quality of it, more detail, and let you know if it's truly a fresh start, along with this book, which is Deadpool #1 as well. Deadpool getting a relaunch with a new creative team. Scotty Young taking over writing duties for Jerry Dugan, who has been on this book for years upon years, and 300 was his last issue. Now Scotty Young is coming on. It's one, but it does keep the legacy numbering with 301 on the bottom. I know that was a big deal for people. I actually really like that approach, because I think you covered you killed two birds with one stone. As a new reader, if you see 301, you might be a little apprehensive, but you see one, I'm like, okay, well, I can pick this up and enjoy it. It's actually coming full circle, because my first experience with Scotty Young were the variant covers he did with Cable and Deadpool years upon years ago, when that was nearing its end, and now he's writing the title. So it's kind of cool to see that go full circle. like Scotty Young. I love I Hate Fairyland. I love what he did with Wizard of Oz series, and I think he has a good sensibility for this character. So I'm hoping that it turns out well. Not a new a book that's going to be getting a relaunch soon, but as of right now, Mark Waid is still finishing up his run on it, and that's Captain America 704. And I've been loving what Mark Waid has been doing with this title since he took it over. Him and Chris Samney had some magic. It brought Captain America back to what it needed to be. And after Samney left, I was a little concerned that this might not be as good because he brought so much to the book. But overall, it's still working. Interesting enough, this storyline has not involved Captain America. It's set in the future with descendants of Captain America. It is quote unquote a filler story, but it's a filler story that's really good and enjoyable. And as Ta-Nehisi Coates is going to be coming in and revamping this title with a #1 on the 4th of July, which is fitting. So as of right now, this is kind of just biding its time, but it's doing so. And if you can do that and still put a good story out, that's the mark of a great writer. And when Mark Waid is doing what he can do, he can be a great writer, which has me hopeful for Doctor Strange #1. And I was loving what Donny Cates was doing with Doctor Strange. I loved what Jason Aaron did with Doctor Strange. Now Mark Waid's taking on the title, and I'm somewhat concerned because I think they established the character really well and making me care about him in ways I typically didn't, usually, especially for a solo book. So I wonder, Mark Waid, just based upon what I saw, is he going more old school with the character, which could be okay. It's worked for Captain America. Maybe it will work for Doctor Strange, but I'll do more of once I read it, do a full review of that and give you my thoughts and opinions in more detail. Moving over to DC, Brian Michael Bendis, who I'm assuming some people have heard of, is continuing his Superman series with the Man of Steel #2. I enjoyed the first issue of Man of Steel. I thought it set the stage well enough. I liked the voice Bendis had. It was weird because it didn't feel like a Bendis book, which is kind of good and bad, because if you're having Bendis take over Superman, do you not want him to put his stamp on it? But at the same time, do you want it not to him to overtake the character he's writing? So as of so far, it's much more Superman than it is Bendis. And we'll see where it goes from here as he's kind of reshaping the world of Superman. I don't know if I'll do a full review of that. After I read it, I'll see if I feel like I have enough to talk about. If not, I'll be talking about it on my podcast, The Comic Concierge, at least in more detail. Also coming out this week is the new Justice League #1, with Scott Snyder taking over. And I'm hoping that this will kind of bring Justice League to where it should be. I'll be honest, I was not a huge fan of Metal, and I wasn't a huge fan of No Justice. So I am supremely concerned I'm not going to like this. Metal, to me, it just was a story that just wasn't for me. It didn't really have what I typically like when it comes to a comic book. It felt like a book that was so dedicated to plot details that it lost me. I prefer books that are character first and plot second, where the characters are informing the plot rather than the plot happening to them. And I felt with Metal that wasn't the case. It really, to me, felt like someone explaining an overly complex tabletop board game that is more complicated than it needs to be, and all I did was want to play with the cool pieces and get the explanation out of the way. No Justice, I thought, smooth things up a little bit. I actually enjoyed the first 2 issues, but by the 3rd and 4th, it lost me more and more. Now that it's a little more streamlined, less writers, one team, maybe some of those issues can subside. I just hope that it can be a little bit more focused and not be all over the place, a sense of just cool idea after cool idea, because I think a lot of setup occurred in Metal and most of it never really paid off in my mind. And I felt like No Justice was similar. So we'll see. I know with an ongoing, you have a lot more room to grow. And I love Scott Snyder's Batman run from the beginning to end. And so it's not like I'm not a fan of Scott Snyder. Just when it came to his team books, it just so far haven't really been clicking with me for some reason, but we'll see. From the world of Image, we have Isola #1, or sorry, not #1, but #3. And I've been really enjoying this series for a lot of different reasons. First, the art, and I'll pick up a page real quick. The art is phenomenal. I love the color palette, first and foremost. I suck at putting things in front of the camera for whatever reason. But what I love about this, it does remind me a lot of a Hayao Miyazaki movie, in the sense of you kind of dropped into a world and you figure things out as you go. It's almost like you feel like you're watching the sequel to a movie that didn't have a sequel, or or you're skipped a few chapters because there's a supreme lack of exposition. It's like the opposite of Scott Snyder's storytelling, and you kind of learn through osmosis. The complexity of the world can seem like hard to grasp, but ultimately the story is really simple. It's really just a soldier trying to get her queen to a safe location, but amongst that is some strange worlds, and there's a lot of great visual storytelling. So I know this book may not be for everyone. It is more fantasy based. Also, there isn't a lot of story per issue, in the sense of narrative. It's more so really been focusing on the characters and just giving you understanding of where this world is at. So for some people, it might be better in trade. I just enjoyed it enough, chapter by chapter, absorbing the art, that I've been really enjoying it, reading it issues. But I think for many readers, trade might be a better bet. Also, this came out the week previously, but like the Harbinger Wars, my store didn't have it, so I'm just getting it now. And that's Judge Dredd Under Siege. Not a huge Judge Dredd fan. I did love Dredd with Carl Urban. I thought that was a fun movie. The reason I picked up this, though, was one big reason, and that's the name on the top there, which is Mark Russell, who I am a big fan of. I loved his work on the Flintstones. I loved his work on Snagglepuss. He's even written some of the Superman short stories and the recent specials that were kind of buying time before Bendis took over. So I thought, okay, well, let's see what he can do with the Judge Dredd series. I have read this, and I did think he handled it quite well. I'm not, like I mentioned, I don't know how much his voice is different from the typical comic book voice of Judge Dredd, but I felt it seemed similar to what I know of the character. And I thought ultimately it kind of has what I want from a Mark Russell book. It has that social commentary. It's really looking into the world of Judge Dredd and what it means to have Mega City 1. What exactly does that look like in the nitty-gritty details? And still a lot of action, and it does in a way reflect the Dredd film, because you do have a situation where you have a lot of people in one location trying to survive. So if you are a Dredd fan, I'd be interested in, like, if hardcore Dredd fans, if it worked for them or not. As a casual Dredd fan, it worked for me. So it gets recommend for me. Also from World of Dark Horse is Sword Daughter #1. This is the B cover. I just liked it a little bit more than the regular cover, but it's the big reason I picked this up was because of the writer Brian Wood, who I'm a huge fan of. Briggs Land was one of my recent favorite series. He wrote Rebels, and I think Black Road was a similar series. So I thought I'd pick this up and see. It is a little bit more expensive, and talking about price again, but the paper quality is a little bit higher, and it does look gorgeous. I haven't read it, but just looking through some of the pages, looks like it could be quite good. So a new series from Dark Horse that looks like it is promising. And last but not least, of course, is that of Death and Glory. I picked up both issues 1 and issue 2. They did a reprinting of issue 1, and by Rick Remender, who to me is pretty much guaranteed to have a great book. Dead to the Class right now, Black Science. Enjoyed both of the series a great deal. This is drawn by Bengal. It's a little bit different from a Remender series in the sense of it's much more straightforward. This seems to be taking place in somewhat of a normal world, normal time. The first issue was really just establishing this character in the sense that she is out of luck. She is in need to help her friend get a medical procedure, and the only way to do that is by robbing this drug dealer. And of course, oddly enough, robbing drug dealers tends to not go well. So the last book ended up with a cliffhanger, and we'll see where this goes. But I'm hoping that it'll be quite good. But for many of these, most of them, especially the Marvel and DC books, I'll be doing complete videos on. But for the rest, if I don't do a full video on, I'll be talking about them in more detail in my Comic Concierge podcast that typically comes out Sundays or Mondays at 12 p.m. Eastern. And I usually go through the books that were, including many of the digital books that I pick up, as I tend to get more things digitally than physical. So check that out for sure. But if you've been enjoying this video, let me know. I appreciate any feedback that you can give, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. But ultimately, just been enjoying doing these videos for GeekCast Radio. We're trying to put more content out there, catch up with the times. But you'll see if you subscribe to our feed, we have a lot of content, usually a podcast a day almost. So that covers a variety of different things, from comic books to movies. Also on the Cinema Geeks podcast, where we do movie reviews and video game and movie games. And there's Altered Geek that gets into a lot of news. There's the Pull Bag, which is another comic book podcast, and tons of TV podcasts. We even have a wrestling podcast. So if you enjoy things, chances are we probably have a podcast about it. But that'll be it for me for this week. I'll be back next time as I talk more about the books that I enjoy. And always remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. And until next time, thanks for watching.